This is Niall with Nole'n with Niall, and I got my guy Taylor from Norville Central, and we're just chopping it up, talking about Georgia Tech and being ready for that, and what that looks like, and how we're going to attack, and what are our players looking like mentally and emotionally, and what that looks like going into the season. But yeah, man, I'm excited, bro. It's been a long off season. It's been a long, and I feel like it's always a long off season. You know what I mean? And then that football season comes, and it feels like it's long, but then it's before you know it, it's gone. But what are we looking like, at least from your standpoint? I know obviously you dropped the depth chart, and what your thoughts were on the depth chart on offense and defense. Obviously, they've officially dropped the depth chart now. What are your thoughts on like what that looks like? You have any question marks or anything like that?
Yeah, so let me first just say, I know you can't see it right now, but I got goosebumps because the start of the season starting already. So, man, we're almost here. Dublin, Ireland, beautiful environment. Can't wait to kind of see how these guys kind of perform. But the depth chart coming out, I know that the depth chart itself, a lot of fans are talking about like how it doesn't really matter. Some things kind of emerge onto other pieces as well, but it is kind of a good indicator as to what Florida State can kind of go through. You got guys on the depth chart that I kind of looked at the depth chart compared to what my projections were. And you got a guy like Jalen Brown starting at wide receiver, who I think very speedy guy. You thought he might be able to go in the slot a little bit. Might take a little bit of time to get developed a little bit more, but man, that speed, you can't teach it. And I know everybody wants to have those 6'4", 6'5" type of receivers. You had Johnny Wilson, you had Keon Coleman, you had those guys that are tall and add a safety blanket to the offense. But when you got a guy like Jalen Brown who's 6'1", I mean, what do you think, kind of in your experiences that you've had, like on the national championship team and everything else? You had a Kelvin Benjamin that was like super lengthy and everything, but you got guys on this starting rotation that like Malik Benson, 6'1", Ja'Kai Douglas, 5'9", and then you got Jalen Brown at 6'1". Do you think it's important to have taller receivers, or do you think it's just best available, best kind of category for those receivers and just whoever can kind of get open?
Yeah, I would say you really need both. You really need both. You'd like to have both in an ideal world. You know what I mean? You want to be able to have something that is a little bit easier, right? Just for specific plays. But if you're not going to be long, 6'3", 6'4", you better be able to be fast, right? You better create that separation that you need in order to make it easier for you to catch the ball, because that's where that length comes in. But it puts a little bit of strain on the receiver, obviously, because they have to get open with speed typically, or just being a very good route runner. And then it puts a little bit of pressure on DJ and our quarterback, because he has to be a little bit more precise. He can't just kind of throw it up and make them go get it. As which we still can. It's just not as easy when you have a 6'6" 6'5" Kelvin Benjamin that can kind of jump up over any of these 6-foot DBs. You know what I mean? So it's a little bit. You really would, in the ideal, you want to have both.
I will say this too, though, because I know during DJ's time at Oregon State, he didn't really have any receivers that were over like 5'10". So him throwing to smaller receivers kind of caters him. Do you think that might have kind of been the result of kind of their selections with this, or do you think it was just best receiver? Obviously, those were the guys that kind of showed up when it mattered the most.
Yeah, I think with us honestly looking through the portal the way that we did, and like I think it was more or less just the best we could have picked up at the time, and for the best quality, right? We had some other things that we needed to pick up as well, so it wasn't like our super heaviest focal point. We had so many other things that we were trying to do, but I think the group that we have is something that we've been able to play with. Obviously, you have Johnny Wilson, which was one of our only like main large receivers, which is, like I said, is always good to have. But we still do have some very large tight ends that we can then substitute that for, as well as athletic tight ends that can really move. So we're going to use that somewhat to substitute that. But at the end of the day, if our guys can get open, we're throwing the ball. It is a catch and run game. You know what I mean? It's just if who can be the most open the most often.
Yeah, totally understand that. I know Norvell is one of the better play callers in the whole NCAA at this point. Knows how to scheme his guys open at that point. I think there's going to be a lot of focal point, especially establishing the run. You got a guy like Trey Benson who went to the NFL. He's with the Arizona Cardinals. Played really well the other night in the preseason game, so super excited to see how he performs as he goes through his professional career. But Going at Florida State, he had over 1,800 yards in 2 seasons. You can't teach that production, especially kind of given the running back position. But it seems like Norvell consistently produces running backs highly at a collegiate level. Back in his days at Memphis, now at Florida State, and the kind of the scheme that it has so far with Florida State. They want to establish the run early and often. And I think especially considering you added guys like Jalen Lucas and Roydell Williams, you have guys on this team that could be successful. But just kind of getting back to your experience as a player, you got first game jitters. You're coming into the season, you're trying to settle down offensively, you're trying to find plays that actually work for you, that cater the system. You got newer receivers, you got newer running backs, you even got a new quarterback. How do you think, with your experiences that you've had so far in terms of first game jitters, how can that kind of basically ease an offense's comfort in terms of just having, the run game and the quick passing game? How do you think that kind of goes with this first game, especially being all the way out in Ireland?
Yeah, it's one thing that I feel like, especially being a Nole, the one thing that I can kind of like feel comfortable about and feel good about is our coach, right? Norvell is such a good coach. And when you, as a player, they always say, okay, well, in doubt, you rely on your technique. But as an organization, as a team, and in doubt, you rely on your coach, And right now, obviously we have a little bit of uncertainty in terms of what's going on and like who we're playing where. And some players are really going to have to fight and be able to like build throughout the season and establish themselves as a true starter or as a true impact player for the team, which is going to be awesome. I really do love that about this season because I think it's going to give a lot of guys opportunity that they potentially wouldn't have had somewhere else. So I do like that. But relying on your coach, Norvell has obviously shown time and time again that he is slowly building the reliability and the culture at Florida State, and all the guys are buying in. Any guy that has come here out of the portal or just coming in and being recruited and as from high school is showing and buying in. So that the jitters of coming in, especially obviously establishing the run and doing some other things in order to help our team establish themselves, is going to be key. Especially those offensive line are going to be jitters. Somebody's got to have some jitters because somebody's going to actually start this thing. And we're probably going to rely on our offensive line, and we're going to rely on them regardless, just because they can pass protect as well as run block. So it's like, with those things being the case, it's going to be, we have the tools and the team and the organization and the money and everything in order to make sure that this organization is where it needs to be. But you can't always pick that coach. And we have the right coach that can help us kind of navigate those uncertain waters right now and kind of level us out if we need to, in order for us to be successful as we come January, as we come to the end of the season. So I'm interested to see what players emerge, what players develop in certain aspects. But as we go into Dublin, our guys, especially like, I'm thinking for myself, you have a first game Pitt, right? We go into Pitt, you're having these jitters, you're a little bit nervous, but you're confident. You've had a good camp. Majority of them have, you know what I mean? Some of them, I have to assume they have some sort of anxiety about it, but for the most part, everyone's had a good camp. We've heard great things. So you're coming in and you're just waiting. You've studied for the test. You've done all the work. Now you're ready to take the test. You're tired of beating up your guys at training camp. You're trying to beating up the same guys. I gotta protect you at the same time. So I'm ready to go take my anger out on somebody else. So we're gonna have those jitters, but the Joshua Farmers, the Daryl Jacksons, the Maliks, the DJUs, the Lundys are going to be very important, because especially for me as a young buck going into Pitt, I'm watching the Telvins, I'm watching the Marcus Joyners, I'm watching the Jameses, and seeing how they're reacting, seeing what they're doing. Because if I'm watching them and they're not nervous and they're confident, I'm like, all right, I'm good. You know what I mean? Like, I'm all right, I'll figure it out. Yeah. So having those leaders create like a baseline of comfort will be huge for these newcomers and huge for these players that feel established but aren't technically established yet. And that all starts from the head coach, because the head coach is going to, the head guys are watching the head coach. You know what I mean? So it all trickles down. So I think we have a very good person on the top in order to make sure that we're bleeding out confidence, and that confidence will bleed to probably I definitely think we're gonna bleed out a victory here, come against Georgia Tech, and I'm looking forward to watching it.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about it clearly. I mean, the offensive line, even though we have an inexperienced offense at certain pieces like quarterback, running back, receiver, and a little bit of tight end as well, that offensive line is very veteran at that point. You got Darius Washington, Maurice Smith, Richie Leonard, TJ Ferguson, Keandre Jones, and we keep going, Jeremiah Byers, Rob Scott. I mean, I just listed 7 guys right there. And I mean, they've all played significant snaps either in college, at Florida State, or other places as well. You got guys in the secondary like Ventrell Cypress and Azaria Thomas and also Shaheem Brown. Those are 3 remarkable guys. Backbone of your defense, even though the front 7, minus DJ Lundy and Patrick Payton and some other guys like that, and Daryl Jackson and Joshua Farmer, you got some other inexperienced linebackers and a couple of inexperienced defensive linemen, but those guys in the back half of the defense, they can really save you a couple of times, especially considering what they can do versatility-wise. So just having that kind of, you talked about before with having that veteran leadership, pulling those guys together and being able to kind of save grace with that, I think can really be efficient to what Florida State can bring to the table this year, especially considering the Vegas number doesn't suggest Florida State being a quote-unquote national champion, but they do suggest Florida State being able to compete for an ACC championship and hopefully getting back to the playoff where they should have been last year.
Yeah, and I have no doubt that we will be that team come that time, and it's I think the culture that's there trumps kind of the talent and everything else that we have, because the talent's obvious. Every team has talent, right? Every Division I team has talent. It's really about the culture and the coaching that kind of plays the biggest factor in using that talent and utilizing it the right way. But one thing I wanted to talk about is that we have, especially with the portal, we have guys that are coming in that really, for the first time in their career, like they're the guy, right? They are the person, and it just goes along. It is across the board. The Maliks, the Patrick Paytons, the DJUs. Like we have a few players that are like, all right, like this is make or break. This is it. So coming into that, especially being there and kind of coming into my senior year, we're going into we played Oregon State in Dallas. And when you realize that you're that guy and you're the person, you have obviously a certain amount of confidence, because you didn't get there for no reason, right? You didn't get there for no reason. You did the blood, sweat, and tears. You're confident in your game more than likely, and you're ready to establish that when it comes to the rest of the world. But one thing I feel like people don't really realize is that when you realize that you're that guy and you understand that for yourself, it's time to now prove it to yourself. Yeah. You can feel it in your heart all you want to, and you could be that when it comes to social media, when it comes to interviews, when it comes to practice, when it comes to all that stuff. But it's time to prove it to yourself. And the only way to prove that to yourself is doing it consistently every single game, because sometimes you have a good game. You know what I mean? Sometimes you have a good game, but a few plays that came your way, a few opportunities that happened that you were able to capitalize on. But when it comes to looking yourself in the mirror after the first game, after the second game, after the third game, and you proved it, and you're like, boy, you start to cook. You know what I mean? So some of those guys that are coming into this first game of the season are ready, and they know that, but all of them are going to be trying to prove it to themselves. That's it. Forget the rest of the country. Forget everyone else. They're going to be proving it to themselves. And that is where you see some of these players emerge, and now they're that guy, and now they're starting to become a All-American watch list. They're starting to, and that's where they start to separate. But I'm really excited to see that. I love college. That's one of the reasons why I love college football, because these are all kids. These kids are out here trying to make an opportunity for themselves, prove it to themselves, prove it and provide things for their family. And we get to watch it on Saturday on the couch, in the stadium, at a bar. We get to watch these kids really fight for something that they believe in. Typically, not all of them do, but majority of the people that are on this team bleed that garnet, bleed it absolutely through and through. So it's awesome to watch players that believe in that same thing, and it's gonna be a fight. But I want to hop in there myself, man. I swear.
Yeah, man. Last thought I got for this as well. Just kind of talking about first day of school. It's gonna be that Monday right after the 24th. At that point, hopefully the players can kind of come back to class and have that kind of glow, that high shoulder. on them. You know, talk about all their classmates and be like, "Yeah, we're 1-0.
Yep.
We're gonna win the national championship," type of feeling. So I'm
Yep.
super excited to see how Mike Norvell and this team kind of continues to progress themselves. I know the first half of the schedule was a little bit easier for Florida State. You never want to take any game for granted, especially in the ACC with some of the teams that are in the conference. But that back half of the schedule is a little bit tougher in terms of the trek that you're going to have to make. But super excited to see if this team can start the 1-0 basically, and just make every game 1-0 and just keep going through the process with everything they have. And I'm super excited to see what this new team can do.
Yeah. Same, man. Same.